Welcome back to these series of lectures on the second half of U.S. history. We talked about American exceptionalism in our last two lectures. I want to remind you the reason we use American exceptionalism in this class is to give you an interpretive tool to evaluate all the information that you're going to hear. For instance, does slavery confirm or contradict the ideas of American exceptionalism? Does Indian removal confirm or contradict American exceptionalism? So it's not just an abstraction, it's something that you can use to interpret American history. Next couple of lectures, we're going to talk about Reconstruction. This is sort of the black hole of American history. Most teachers spend as little time as possible on it. People know very little about it. It's very complex. It seems like there's a lot of villains and very few heroes. So I'm going to try to streamline it for you. The first thing I want to talk about with Reconstruction is context. Where does it fit in the broad scope of American history? Well, it's the settlement of the American Civil War. It's usually treated as a completely separate and discrete topic, and this is quite wrong. It should be part of the Civil War. You can no more separate Reconstruction from the Civil War than you could separate the Versailles Treaty from World War I. They're all part of the same. So the larger context, the American Civil War. A second context for Reconstruction would be where does the power lie in the United States? This is a battle that's been going on from the very beginning. You can see it perfectly illustrated in the struggle between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson on the role of government, on the size of government. We continue to fight about this today. If you listen to your Republican Party, they constantly complain about the Democrats wanting bigger and bigger governments. So this is an old issue, and Reconstruction is a part of this. Reconstruction will demonstrate that ultimately the power in this country lies at the federal level instead of the state level. Prior to the Civil War, most people would have said the opposite, that power lies locally, not nationally. The Civil War and the Reconstruction Amendments are going to change this, and power is going to flow to Washington and away from the states. Significance of Reconstruction, I'm going to give you a couple here. This is going to transform Southern society from a slave society to an increasingly market society or capitalist economy. It's going to transform the lives of African Americans in the South. They're going to become citizens for the first time with the ability to run for office and to vote. This is also going to bring the Republican Party to the South, at least briefly, whereby Republicans, newly freed African Americans, are going to try to assert their will in the South through this Reconstruction period. This will end in 1776, 1777. We'll talk about that later. You should be familiar with the fact that there are three plans for Reconstruction. The first is Abraham Lincoln's. His plan is called the 10% Plan. Lincoln had just endured this bloodbath of a war, and now that the war is ending, he wants very much to put the country back together again. He wants to make this process quick and simple, and to bring the southern states back into the Union as quickly as possible with the least fuss as possible. So the 10% Plan is very lenient and quite easy to understand. The southern states, if 10% of their voters will declare allegiance to the United States and disavow secession, then that state is back in the Union. So you can see that Lincoln is, his first priority is to put the country back together. Of course, Lincoln is assassinated in April of 1865, and his 10% Plan will go to the grave with him. Following Lincoln, of course, is Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's vice president. Johnson's plan is known to history as presidential Reconstruction. Johnson is a Southerner. He's from East Tennessee. He has no sympathy for the slave-owning class, and he has no sympathy for African Americans. He doesn't believe that African Americans, these newly freedmen and women, have any role in Reconstruction. He's going to require the Confederate elite to appeal to him personally for pardons. And his plan is going to be regarded as too lenient on the South by the third group, and that is the radical Republicans in the Congress and in the Senate. The radical Republicans are perfectly illustrated by two men, Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania and Charles Sumner of Massachusetts. These radical Republicans believe that the South should be treated as a conquered country. Charles Sumner made the remark that the southern states had committed, let's see, how did he put it? They had committed state suicide, and that they were no longer states, and that it was up to the American Congress to reconstitute them, and at the moment to treat them as territories to be rebuilt or reconstructed by the Senate and the House. The radical Republicans believe that the South should be punished for its transgressions. And indeed, the radical Republicans imposed military rule on the conquered South. They divided the southern states up into 5 military districts, and they appointed political and military chieftains over these districts. So the radical Republicans, on the one hand, believe that the newly freed African Americans deserve every break they can get and every benefit of the doubt, while at the same time they seek to punish the leadership of the Old South, of the Confederacy. The radical Republicans will win this struggle over Reconstruction. Their view of Reconstruction will prevail. Now, I want to go back just a bit, lay the groundwork for these Reconstruction plans. All of you have heard of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. This took effect in January of 1863, whereby Lincoln freed those slaves in the Deep South, slaves that were out of reach of Union armies, slaves that we could not physically free. Those slaves in the border states, closer to the Union, were not affected by the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln had no desire to alienate the border states and to perhaps drive them into rebellion with this emancipation, but he viewed the Emancipation Proclamation as a military weapon to create psychological chaos and stress in the Deep South. After all, once these slaves find out through gossip and word of mouth that the President of the United States has freed them, this creates a great deal of tension on the plantations down south. After the Emancipation Proclamation, many African Americans will flee northward and will join the Union Army. This, of course, is very powerful symbolic evidence of African American equality with whites, and it's going to be increasingly difficult to deny them this equality. There are a couple of institutions that are going to emerge here during the Reconstruction period that you should be familiar with. One is the Freedmen's Bureau. Now, this is a federal effort to help the newly freed African Americans get on their feet. Let's face it, the slaves had existed in bondage their entire lives, their parents and grandparents, and to be suddenly freed is problematic. Where's the next meal coming from? Where am I going to sleep? What am I going to do for a living? The Freedmen's Bureau is set up to help these newly freedmen make the transition to a life of full citizenship and freedom. So they help with labor contracts. Slavery's dead, yet the cotton still needs to be picked. So many African Americans are going to remain on the plantations to pick this cotton, not in the form of slavery, but as sharecroppers. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about the New South. The Freedmen Bureau is going to set up schools. so that African Americans can become educated, become literate. They'll aid with health care, with churches, with just a variety of institutions that these newly freedmen need to help get on their feet. Now, at the same time, the Southern governments are going to try to institute what we call black codes. These black codes emerge in the Southern states during Reconstruction, and their purpose is to maintain white supremacy. You see here the emergence of the original Ku Klux Klan, sort of an extra-legal vigilante type of justice. Really, using justice here is probably not the right word. It's more of state-sponsored terrorism, you probably should call it. The Ku Klux Klan is designed to intimidate the Republicans here in the South, and it's designed to intimidate African Americans who are suddenly believe themselves to be full-fledged citizens. Black codes will prohibit African Americans from owning property, from carrying a weapon, from congregating in groups of more than 3 in a town, or to even be in a town after dark. Just a variety of discriminatory tactics are used in these black codes. And again, they're designed to maintain white supremacy. There is the sense in the South that having lost the war and the federal government having passed the Reconstruction Amendments, freeing slaves and elevating them to full citizenship, that's one thing. Southerners recognize that it may be difficult to stop that progress, but Southerners also believe that they will not allow social equality. Political equality may be a fact of life. Social equality, no. So black codes are designed to maintain white supremacy and keep the races separate. I'm going to mention the 3 Reconstruction Amendments here in closing. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. You should read these on your own. You can simply Google them, or you can check the links in D2L. The 13th Amendment will abolish slavery. The 14th Amendment will, in theory, establish the notion of equality before the law for blacks and whites. And then the 15th Amendment will abolish restrictions on voting based on race. These 3 amendments are going to fundamentally overturn traditional life in the South, at least in theory. Now, once Reconstruction ends, Southerners will put up a massive resistance to these amendments. And we will see basically 100 years, a century, from the 1870s up until the 1960s, when Southern resistance to civil rights and the Reconstruction Amendments will take form. We'll talk about this later, of course, when we get to civil rights in the 20th century. So I'm going to stop there in this initial lecture on Reconstruction, and we'll pick up some more details of this in our next lecture. Thank you.